how mature is the Indian startup or entrepreneur segment as compared to the rest of the world, right? So when we benchmark it with, let's say developed countries or top countries in the world, so where does India stand?
The proof of the pudding is in the number of unicorns that have come out of this market and emerged in the last couple of years, COVID notwithstanding. So I think that's a great sign. On one hand, you have youngsters just out of college and B school getting into the entrepreneurial journey, which brings that gush of fresh air and new energy, enthusiasm, etc. And on the other hand, you also have a lot of founders who worked for maybe 10, 15, 20 years plus, and people like me with hopefully some gray hairs and some wisdom coming in and setting up something of their own. So I think that whole culture of entrepreneurship, I think, has evolved.
Hi, Subhrangshu. How are you doing today?
Hi, how are you? Good to be
Great,
here.
great. I'm doing great. So, before we start the session, I would like to set the context and the pace of discussion. So, as you know, today we'll be discussing about entrepreneurship, which is the most aspired skill of 21st century. And today we have Mr. Subhrangshu Neogi, a seasoned business leader with almost 3 decades of diverse multi-industry experience in various corporate roles. And for the last 3 years, he is on his entrepreneurial journey, right? So before we get into the discussion, I would like to hand it over to you for you to introduce yourself and tell us about your journey till now.
Real pleasure to be here and good to be talking to your audience today. I started out in the mid 90s. So I spent almost 26, 27 years in various corporate leadership roles, starting in FMCG. That's where I cut my teeth in sales, marketing, distribution, etc. Moved into, retail, was part of the initial core team at Reebok India, launching the brand and expanding it across various geographies in India and other parts of Asia. Post which I had a stint in Telecom for about 4.5 years. And fascinating. Was involved with the early days of the internet, the international long distance, industry in India, and then also was instrumental in or was part of the core team that took this business to multiple countries outside of India as well. After that, I had a stint in media, brief one with the Times of India brand. I used to manage the master brand Times of India, based out of Bombay. Post which I was in consulting with an Indo-Japanese venture based out of Tokyo and Delhi. And then, of course, I had a very long stint with Religare, the diversified financial services group, and was fortunate enough to be part of that journey from where they were essentially an unlisted entity at that point in time into just one or two businesses, and was part of the core team that, pretty much was part of the story which saw the entire listing of the holding company and diversifying into almost 10, 12 businesses across various geographies. So I used to be part of the core group leadership team as a CMO for the group, and was an exciting experience for almost 12 years. And then my last stint on the corporate side was with Laureate Global Education as the Chief Operating Officer for their India business. And then 2019 Q3, I jumped into entrepreneurship. So I essentially now do a few things, like any entrepreneur, have my fingers in, multiple pies. So I'm executive director and an early stage investor and an operating partner in a very exciting fintech venture called Escrow Pay. Escrow Pay is a escrow focused, neobank out of India, and we were the first company or a first fintech to actually uh, develop and deploy digital escrow solutions in India. So very exciting business. Happy to be part of that, and being pioneers, we've also done a bunch of cool things, and there are some great learnings which I'd love to share with everybody. I've also incubated, a growth advisory firm called Cbox Advisory, where I have a co-founder and a team, and we work with mid-tier businesses, emerging businesses at the intersection, as we call it, of sales, marketing, and tech-led innovation, with the objective of helping them scale and grow their businesses. That apart, I'm also a board advisor with a few interesting, exciting B2B SaaS companies, helping them grow their footprint and presence in India and this part of the world. And also, more recently, have incubated and co-creating a very exciting D2C sustainable fashion brand called B77 with some friends and old associates. So again, a very exciting business. but yeah, that's that. I mean, so it's been a fantastic journey and many learnings, many challenges, and obviously, like any journey, has had its own highs and lows. And clearly, I'd love to share my learnings with your audience and with everyone.
Interesting. So that's very interesting that you have diversified experience in your kitty. Like you started with FMCG, then you transitioned into telecom, then again you are into fintech. So quite uh,
Education, financial services.
diverse profile that you are having, right? So that is something which is very fascinating and quite interesting, right? So now, moving on to the very first question, like, can you give the overview of industry size and the market dynamics that are there in this ecosystem that we are currently, right? So you have seen it transition from, you might have seen it transition in last 30 years, right? So it might be very different that time, and it is very different today. So, right, if you can shed some light over there, it'll be
Fortunate enough to be part of multiple business cycles, from the time where it was essentially physical distribution. There was no internet, there were no cell phones. And, I still remember the days when we were fortunate being in sales and distribution and traveling. We used to get these, fancy sort of cell phones where incoming was actually a luxury. And I still remember if you were to call me, I will just quickly, and of course we had pagers as well, early days. I'm talking about mid 90s. So if somebody were to call, you would say quickly, that look, I'm on my cell phone. So it was more like a paging mechanism where people used to call and used to say, I'll call you back from a landline. So from those days to where we are today, where the world essentially has pretty much come alive in that little screen, has been a fascinating journey. That apart, of course, out of the school, privatization, because early days of privatization, a lot was changing. New multinationals were coming in, right? From a consumer standpoint, you didn't have too many choices, when we were growing up and in our early days. And, if your friends and family were traveling abroad, you actually used to give them a laundry list of things to buy and shop, from duty free and otherwise. But again, having seen that to where we are today with, leading brands of the world, all in India. So, be it infrastructure, be it brands, be it, the telecom revolution, be it digital, it is India is like any other, developed country today, right? And the economy, of course, is going from strength to strength. And a lot has happened, even on the government front over the last few years, be it, uh, an impetus towards, a less cash economy, to digital payments, to, the proliferation of the internet, mobile. I think it's been a fascinating journey, right? And even from a sales and distribution standpoint, I mean, you had your typical linear physical distribution, those days, to what we call as a phygital distribution today, right? From a consumer standpoint, as I see it, I mean, the consumer is much more aware. Okay, the consumer doesn't want to be sold anything or told anything. The consumers are far more evolved, and brands obviously need to kind of get into a conversation in order to really be part of any consumer's life. And the other big change has been, the sort of non-linear consumer decision journey as we've seen over the years. I mean, earlier you had the typical IDA model, where it was very linear, where people used to see ads, communication, and there was stimuli based on which people used to go and buy stuff, and brands used to market themselves. But now, the consumer decision journey is non-linear, as we all know it. I mean, if you were to buy something and your generation was to buy something, or even my generation to buy something, we'd actually do our own research. We'll go on social media, we'll talk to friends, we'll see what's there, offline in stores. We will get influenced by multiple things, we'll reference out, and then we'll make our decision. So I think that's been a big change. And, consumers have changed, their decision journeys have changed, the macros have changed, aspirations have changed, awareness levels have gone up. So therefore, for brands, etc., and for companies to sort of engage with consumers has become that much more challenging. And the sheer proliferation of brands at the retail level, I think, is amazing. I mean, every category that you see today, whether it's beauty and personal care, food and beverages, telecom, there's a plethora of choices. Gone are the days where there was, kind of a duopoly or a monopoly, barring a few sectors. I think there are a plethora of choices. So I think getting that mind space of the consumer is very, very challenging, right? And India continues to be a vibrant market. So every day, some new brand is being launched. Every day, something new is happening. Very exciting, compared to what it was, where most of 20 years back, when most of the action was happening, let's say in other parts of Asia or in the West. In the last few years, I think that center or the seat of power or the center of action has actually shifted to India. Because if you go out on the roads today, if you see the infrastructure, the way it's changed, the way things are growing, I mean, there's only one way to grow, and that's northwards. So exciting times, and I think I've been fortunate enough among some other people as well, my peers and colleagues, etc., who've been fortunate enough to see this entire sort of cycle, starting from the mid 90s to the early 2000s, was the early internet boom, to the 2008 crisis, to what we see in the last few years in terms of digitization, the digital push, demonetization, uh, the GST regime coming in, the new tax regime coming in. So yeah, I mean, exciting journey.
Interesting. So I believe you have summed it up pretty well, like from where it started and what we are or where we are today, and how the perception has changed in terms of consumer and in terms of brands as well, right? So interesting, right there. So now, what that brings me to my next question, like how mature is the Indian startup or entrepreneur segment as compared to the rest of the world, right? So when we benchmark it with, let's say developed countries or top countries in the world, so where does India stand from that point?
Especially in the last couple of years. I mean, the proof of the pudding is in the number of unicorns that have come out of this market and emerged in the last couple of years, COVID notwithstanding. So I think that's a great sign. The other good thing is that, it's a very sort of a diverse mix when it comes to founders. I mean, on one hand, you have youngsters just out of college and B school getting into the entrepreneurial journey, which, brings that gush of fresh air and new energy, enthusiasm, etc. And on the other hand, you also have a lot of founders who worked for maybe 10, 15, 20 years plus. And, people like me with hopefully some gray hairs and some, wisdom coming in and setting up something of their own. So I think that whole culture of entrepreneurship, I think has evolved. Okay. Earlier, when we were growing up and when we were in our early days, if people were to say that, look, I'm becoming an entrepreneur, people probably had a different perception. But today, becoming an entrepreneur, is easier. The ecosystem is more enabling, right? Availability of capital is definitely there, but the basics haven't changed. So if you were to build a good foundation or a solid business, be it entrepreneurship or be it in any corporate role, I think the fundamentals of business have not changed. So I think that's where we are. And in terms of the ecosystem, it is definitely much more enabling and much more sort of welcoming than what it was earlier. It's definitely evolved. Quality of founders, quality of entrepreneurs, obviously, has evolved, and people have gone through their own set of learnings, and they've been quick to pivot. I mean, people who've been in this journey, especially some startups which have sort of grown and evolved over the years, over the last maybe 8-10 years, have also had their share of learnings, and they've pivoted effectively. But net, I think it's an exciting space. India is a huge consumer market. Even from a B2B standpoint, there are businesses who are making here and sort of selling abroad. So I think there are great opportunities both for B2C and B2B businesses.
Correct. Correct. Right. So there's another segment altogether that is coming in, like D2C. You also started your D2C brand where, direct to consumer is the new trend that is going on in the market, I believe, right? So that brings me to my next question. Like, what are the key driving factors for the industry in India, specifically entrepreneurship as a whole, or a startup ecosystem as a whole?
So, I think basically, you need to have a good idea, okay? And if you have a good idea, you need to bring it to life, because, beyond a point, it's not just about ideation or strategy, it's about solid execution, okay? And then, of course, you need to surround yourself with a very, very strong team, okay? At times, founders get so involved with their idea that, they probably don't spend enough time in terms of building a good, solid execution team. I think that's very important. Third thing is always, have a good, bunch of people, a sounding board, or a, advisory board who can actually help you with some outside in thinking. Because, when you are building your product, or your solution, and taking to the market, it's very important to think intuitively. and I think most people do. And we've seen a lot of successful inside out thinking in the market. But at the same time, it's good to have a counterpoint. It's good to have a contra view, and therefore it's very important to have a good, solid advisory board. So surround yourself by good, solid people, well-wishers, whether it's a structured advisory board, mentors, etc. But as an entrepreneur, the decision is yours. Most people I have seen that even if they're getting advice, at times they get too carried away and sort of get overtly dependent on advisors. Ultimately, advisors are not going to drive your business. You have to drive your own business as a founder. So I think that's critical. So therefore, having your own point of view is very, very critical after having absorbed things from the ecosystem. Secondly, as I said, having a good execution and a strong team is very important. And people are really pretty much at the heart of everything that you need to do in a business. So therefore, you can't ignore that. Third is, while it's good to have a great idea, I think execution is very important. So at times, you should strive for perfection. But as I say, at times progress is better than perfection, right? The fourth thing is you need to understand your consumer very well. At times, you built a product, but there is not enough understanding of the consumer. Ultimately the consumer is going to consume your solution and your offering or your product, right? So understanding of the consumer is very, very critical. And the fifth, of course, is this whole thing of going to market. Initially, I think you need to be very, very frugal. You need to ensure that your model is capital efficient. It's throwing cash. It's not just about creating a hype and valuation, etc. Because I strongly believe valuation is an outcome. As I said, over the last 20, 30 years, whatever businesses I've seen and been part of, as long as you tick the right boxes, as long as your fundamentals are fine, valuation will follow, capital will follow, and recognition will follow. So I think getting the basics right for any entrepreneur is very, very important. So that that very, very sort of a straight and strong focus in terms of your P&L priorities, in terms of capital deployment, in terms of throughput, in terms of whether the business is actually generating cash or not. I think those are some of the very basic priorities you need to take care of, among other things.
Correct, correct, right. So now, I'm sure that you might have also faced a lot of challenges while, you were on your entrepreneurial journey, right? So what are the key challenges that are faced by entrepreneurs today?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, whoever thought that entrepreneurship was easy, it's not easy because, if you were to look at when you were in a sort of a conventional role, 30th of the month, you have a very, very cushy scenario where there's a, inflow of cash coming in. Everything is taken care of, right? You're in a very cushy, sort of relatively comfortable position. But when it comes to entrepreneurship, as they say, in Hindi, कि हर रोज नया कुआं खोदना पड़ता है और पानी निकालना पड़ता है. So I think that is the key for any entrepreneur, big, small, mid-tier, etc. And that journey is an ongoing journey. The second thing is you need to obviously be continuously looking at new things and doing new things and trying new things. So as they say, you have to keep doing A/B testing, keep firing bullets, and hopefully if you fired 10 bullets, maybe 2 or 3 sort of hit the target or they hit the bullseye. So before firing big cannonballs and really kind of investing capital upfront, you need to fire those small bullets, do some experiments, see what works, what doesn't work, do some A/B testing, keep looking at the consumer, because you will win some, you will lose some. Actually, lose more than winning more. So therefore, you should not lose heart. You should be absolutely focused in terms of doing what you're doing. And thirdly, I think you need to be flexible and open to new ideas. Tomorrow you should not be completely so sort of passionate about your own idea that you fail to think dispassionately. I think you need to be objective. You need to be an objective thinker. Think dispassionately, and if your idea is not working, be quick to pivot. So I think those are some of the challenges which people have faced, and they've overcome these challenges by sticking to basics, by being nimble, by being agile, and more importantly, having a very, very clear view of what the market wants and what the reality is out there. And of course, being capital efficient, being frugal, trying out new things, yet, as I said, not firing those cannonballs too soon. But before you fire the big cannonballs, try and fire a few bullets and see what hits the bullseye and what doesn't.
Correct. Correct. I'm sure while you were on or you are on your journey, right? So there might be certain milestones that you might have achieved. So in terms of your contributions towards the industry. So if you can shed some light over there, probably talk about one or two instances, it'll be great.
No, no, sure. So I think if you look at escrow pay today, I think it's a very, very exciting business. Escrow pay is India's first, escrow focused neobank. As I said, we were the first company to have digitally developed escrow solutions and deployed them, seamlessly. We started out as a B2C business, but now we are an enterprise focused B2B business, enabling platforms and businesses with instant digital escrow solutions so that they in turn can actually queue in trust and transparency in transactions on their platforms for their buyers and sellers, right? So I think that's a very exciting business, and we were the first one to actually do this in India. Of course, inspired by some successful global models. But I think EscrowPay has been a fantastic journey. We've scaled up very, very rapidly, in the last couple of years. And COVID actually was, a sort of a watershed for us because, because of COVID, supply chains were breaking down, trust and transparency were breaking down when it came to transactions. Remote transactions were becoming a reality. So escrow was the only answer. And banks today, because of systemic limitations, etc., offer escrows, but it is a very lengthy process. It's largely manually driven. It has its own complications. So I think as a fintech, we partnered with banks and people in the banking ecosystem to actually create something innovative. So today we can actually sort of deliver digital escrow solutions which can be delivered instantly, which was something which was unheard of a few years back till the time we actually started it. And yeah, I mean, we keep sort of disrupting the payments and collections ecosystem in India through our solution. So that's clearly on the escrow pay front. At Cbox Advisory, we're a classical advisory firm, so we work with a lot of emerging businesses, with mid-tier businesses and people who want to scale and grow. And as I said, we work at the intersection of sales, marketing, and digital innovation. And there too, we've seen that there is a lot of headroom and legroom for growth. And people who are into traditional distribution, there is a lot of hunger, a lot of ambition to sort of disrupt their own categories. They're not scared to take chances, and they would want to kind of try out new things. And that's where the Cbox team comes in and holds them and works along with them to really keep raising the bar in terms of innovation, in terms of scale, growth, and helping them grow to the next level. A few other businesses that I'm working with, as I said, the B77 business, which is where I'm happy to be a shareholder, as well as part of the sort of founding team from the sidelines, as I call it. We have a great team there. It's a great brand, and we are into sustainable fashion and catering to discerning audiences. And we've also leveraged technology, so which was again unheard of. So we were the first ones in India in B77 to actually deploy a digital trial room, technology enabled a virtual trial room, through heat mapping technologies, etc., which enables people remotely to try out clothes before you order. So that, I think, takes care of sizes, takes care of returns, takes care of some basic pain areas in the whole buying process, as well as pains for manufacturers and brands, right? Very solid founding team with about more than 2 decades in traditional manufacturing, exports, etc. And they were brave, and and sort of innovative enough to say that, hey, now that we've been on the manufacturing side, sort of on the back end, why don't we launch our own D2C brand? So I think a lot of entrepreneurs are thinking that way. A lot of entrepreneurs are embracing technology, embracing innovative ideas, and I think it's a very fertile ecosystem, right? So today, if somebody were to go out there and try and do something, I think this is the best time. And the sooner you do it, the better. I keep encouraging a lot of youngsters that, look, if you're thinking entrepreneurship, don't procrastinate. Don't say that I will do it when I've done it. I think I jumped into it maybe a little too late. At times I feel so. I could have probably done that 10 years back. But again, at that time, maybe the enabling ecosystem or the ecosystem was not enabling enough. But today things have changed. So it's a very fertile world out there. A lot of innovations happening, a lot of action happening, and there are interesting technologies which are sort of emanating from this market and then going global. So I think this is the best time for youngsters, or even otherwise, to kind of keep jumping in and sort of keep disrupting.
Correct. Correct. That's quite interesting. So That brings me to my last question. Although you touched upon this a little bit, like what is your piece of advice for anyone who is willing to start, or anyone who is looking to start his or her entrepreneurial journey, right?
Very simple. Yeah. I mean, business is not very complicated. I think people at times complicate it. As we've read in the books and as we've seen while growing up, there's a revenue side. There's a expense side. Okay, of any P&L. I think sticking to your P&L basics is very, very, very important. You can't have a great idea and you can't keep burning cash, because ultimately it's going to catch up. And it's going to really pull you back. So definitely stick to basics. If you have a great idea, stick to execution, because execution is very important, right? uh, Surround yourself with good people. Team is very important. And more importantly, and most importantly, I think it's all about not losing focus of the big picture. So a combination of the big picture with a rigorous focus on execution and a diligent approach to P&L mechanics, and of course the right people, and all this put together are definitely, and if you do them well, valuation is an outcome, value creation is an outcome. So don't be in a hurry, be patient, and grow your business, as I call it, anxiety free. It's a journey. Enjoy the journey.
Correct.
And if you enjoy the journey, and if you enjoy doing what you're doing, results will follow.
Correct.
Of course, there is no guarantee. There are no guarantees. There are no free lunches, and there is no assurance that you will succeed. But at least ensure that while you're in this journey, enjoy your journey, be passionate about doing what you're doing, do the right things, get the basics right. Valuation and other metrics and other success, barometers will follow.
Correct. Correct. That's quite true. Right. So it was a lovely conversation, Shubhrangshu. That's about it from my end. So it was pleasure having you on board with us for this
My
discussion,
pleasure.
and I'm sure I personally have a couple of key takeaways from this discussion, and I'm sure the audience will also, have their set of takeaways, right? So it was nice interacting with you, Shubhrangshu. Thanks a
No, no,
lot.
my pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for taking time out, for this chat. And I hope, people who are listening in, people who are viewing this, would find this useful. And, I'm an open networker, as I told you earlier. I'm available on LinkedIn. People can reach out to me. Always a pleasure, to meet up with young people, with entrepreneurs, and try and do my bit for the ecosystem.
Correct.
Thank
Correct.
you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.